It was a quiet winter morning in the small town of Elmsbrook, where snowflakes drifted lazily through the crisp air, settling like delicate whispers on rooftops and trees. The town was still waking, smoke curling from chimneys, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the bakery at the corner. In a little house at the end of Maple Street lived Clara Dawson, a retired piano teacher whose heart had known both the music of joy and the silence of loss. Clara lived alone now. Her husband, Walter, had passed away 3 winters ago, and though the world around her had moved on, Clara often found herself lost in the quiet moments when the house felt too large, too empty. The piano in the corner, once alive with melody shared between her and Walter, now sat untouched, its keys gathering dust. But every morning, Clara followed the same gentle routine: tea by the window, a small smile for the sparrows on her sill, and a quiet prayer of gratitude for another day. It was a rhythm of peace she had learned to create in the absence of sound. One morning, as she sipped her tea, she noticed a figure across the street, a boy of perhaps 10 or 11, bundled in a tattered coat, standing by the park gate. He was drawing something in the snow with a stick, his little hands red from the cold. Clara watched him for a moment before turning away, thinking he'd soon go home. But the next morning, he was there again, and the morning after that. Curiosity stirred in her heart. Who was this boy, and why did he linger there in the cold? By the 4th day, she decided to find out. She wrapped herself in her thick wool coat, slipped into her boots, and stepped outside. The snow crunched softly beneath her feet as she crossed the street. The boy noticed her coming and froze, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and fear. "Good morning," Clara said warmly. "It's quite cold out here, isn't it?" He didn't reply. He simply looked at her, his breath forming small clouds in the air. She smiled gently, kneeling beside him. "I see you like to draw," she said, glancing at the patterns he'd made in the snow: swirls, stick figures, and what looked like a clumsy attempt at a bird. Still, he said nothing. His eyes darted between her and the ground, his shoulders tense. Clara tried again. "Do you live nearby?" He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. That's when Clara noticed a small notebook poking out from his coat pocket. It looked worn, its edges frayed. She pointed to it. "You like to write?" The boy pulled it out hesitantly and opened it. Inside were pages filled with drawings, some simple, others surprisingly detailed. Animals, faces, houses, even a piano. Clara's breath caught for a moment. "That's lovely," she said softly, tracing her gloved finger just above one of the sketches. "Did you draw this yourself?" The boy nodded. She smiled, her eyes kind. "You're very talented." For the first time, a faint smile flickered across his face. Then he turned the page to a sketch of a small bird perched on a branch, its beak open as if singing. Beneath it, he had written, in shaky letters, "When birds sing, I listen." Clara understood. He couldn't speak. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "You can't talk, can you?" He lowered his gaze and shook his head. Something inside Clara softened even more. Here was a child who lived in a world of silence, just as she had since losing her music. Different kinds of silence, perhaps, but silence all the same. She asked softly, "What's your name?" The boy tore a scrap of paper from his notebook and wrote, in neat letters, "Eli." "Eli," she repeated with a smile. "That's a wonderful name." From that day on, Eli became a quiet presence in Clara's life. He would come by her gate every morning, and Clara would wave from her window. Sometimes he would draw in the snow, sometimes she would bring him hot cocoa in a thermos, setting it on the fence post with a note that simply said, "Stay warm." They didn't need words. Their friendship grew in gestures, a wave, a smile, a small drawing left on her doorstep. One day, Clara invited him inside. She pointed to the piano in her living room, dusted and untouched for so long. Eli's eyes widened at the sight of it. "Would you like to hear something?" she asked. He nodded eagerly. Clara sat down and pressed a key. The sound was hesitant, like a voice unused for years, but soon her fingers began to find their rhythm. The melody flowed through the room, gentle, warm, filled with something that had been asleep inside her heart. She glanced at Eli, who sat on the edge of the couch, eyes shining, hands moving as if he could feel the music through the air. When she finished, Eli clapped silently, a broad smile lighting up his face. Then he took his notebook and began to draw furiously. When he showed her the sketch, it took her breath away. It was her, at the piano, surrounded by waves of music that looked like light. She laughed softly. "That's beautiful, Eli. You drew what I felt." And in that moment, Clara realized that though Eli could not speak, he had found his own way to make the world listen. Weeks turned into months. The snow melted, replaced by the fresh scent of spring. Eli came every day after school, helping Clara with small chores or sketching by the window while she played. Sometimes they shared sandwiches, sometimes quiet companionship. Clara learned that Eli lived with his grandmother in a small apartment near the river. His parents had died in an accident when he was very young, and he had stopped speaking entirely afterward. His grandmother worked long hours, leaving him alone much of the day. Clara's heart ached for him, yet she marveled at his resilience, the way he found beauty in silence, the way his drawings spoke when he could not. One afternoon, Eli brought something new. It was a small wooden box, handmade, with rough edges. On the lid, he had carved a heart and a single word, "Listen." He handed it to her shyly. Inside were tiny folded papers, each with a drawing, a tree, a bird, a piano, a pair of hands holding a cup of tea, and finally, a simple sketch of two figures, one old, one young, sitting together. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak either, not for a moment. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. He looked up at her, and in that shared silence, something passed between them, a kind of love that didn't need sound to exist. That evening, Clara placed the box on her piano. It became a symbol, a reminder that even the quietest hearts can speak volumes when love leads the way. As the months went by, their bond deepened. Eli began to learn simple melodies on the piano, guided by Clara's gentle hands. He would watch her fingers carefully, mimicking the movements until a hesitant tune emerged. Whenever he played, Clara could see the joy bloom in his eyes, the same joy she once shared with Walter. The house, once heavy with silence, now echoed with music again. Then, one summer afternoon, Eli arrived with a surprise. He carried a piece of paper and handed it to her with a grin. On it was an invitation, written neatly in his grandmother's handwriting. It read, "Elmsbrook Elementary, Art Exhibition, featuring works by Eli Thompson." Clara's eyes widened. "You're going to show your drawings?" Eli nodded proudly. That night, Clara polished her shoes, wore her favorite lavender scarf, and attended the exhibition. The room was filled with laughter and chatter, but she moved quietly, her heart full. When she reached Eli's section, she stopped. There, displayed under a soft light, were his drawings, scenes from their friendship. Clara at the piano, her house with birds on the windowsill, 2 mugs of cocoa steaming on a snowy day. And in the center, the most beautiful piece of all, a drawing titled, "When Love Spoke Without Words." It showed an elderly woman and a young boy sitting side by side at a piano, surrounded by music notes that floated upward like butterflies. Beneath it, Eli had written, "You don't need a voice to be heard. Sometimes, love is the loudest sound of all." Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned to Eli, who stood beside her, beaming. She knelt and hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." Eli pulled back, his eyes glistening. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed at hers. She understood perfectly. In the months that followed, Clara's home became more than a quiet retreat, it became a sanctuary of shared kindness and creativity. Children from the neighborhood began visiting to learn piano or sketch with Eli. The walls, once echoing with silence, now hummed with laughter, music, and the soft scratch of pencils. And though Clara sometimes still missed Walter, she felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of purpose, of connection, of love that reached beyond words. Years later, when Clara grew frail and her hair turned completely silver, Eli, now a young man, continued to visit. He played the piano for her, his fingers graceful and sure, each note carrying the love she had once shared with him. When her time finally came, she left him a letter in the wooden box he had given her years before. It read, "My dear Eli, you taught me that silence is not emptiness, it is a space where love grows deeper. Thank you for reminding me to listen, even when the world was quiet. Keep playing, keep drawing, and let your kindness be the music that fills the world. With all my love. Clara." Eli sat at her piano, tears falling softly onto the keys. Then he began to play, the same melody she had played for him on that first winter day. The room filled with sound, not just music, but memory, gratitude, and love that lingered in the air long after the last note faded. Outside, the evening sun painted the sky in gold and rose. A small bird landed on the windowsill and began to sing. Eli smiled through his tears. He didn't need words to say goodbye. Because love, true love, had already spoken.